What is up, everybody? Sean Sheehan back here with another edition of the Sheehan Show, and today is the second episode in my series talking about judging. Now, it's a big one this week. There's a big change in the world of judging, in how judging is being done, and it's something we really haven't been told about, not many people know about, but it's actually a monumental change that I have kind of hinted at on Twitter over the last while, but I'm going to talk about in full and explain it because it needs something like this to explain it, and it's to do with 10-8. So I'm gonna hit this in three segments here. I'm going to tell you what we have been working with 10-8s up until the change has happened. So from the end of 2016, when the criteria was revised, through to when the criteria has been kind of revised again. Then I'm going to explain what we have now, and then I'm going to look maybe to the future, look to my opinion, tell you my opinion about what I think the criteria for 10-8 should look like. So I'm going to start it off here, and I'm going to tell you about the 10-8s from before and what 10-8s look like when the criteria was revised. So the criteria was revised, as I mentioned in the last video. You can check it out again. You can go and read the criteria if you just look up MMA judging criteria. The ABC website is one of the first links that comes up. Just click on that and read through it. It's only 3.5 pages, but a sample from that's 3 paragraphs talks about the 10-8s. So maybe you hear people talking about the 3Ds when they talk about 10-8. So what the 3Ds are damage, duration, and dominance. Right, so damage, obviously, when you hurt someone with strikes or grappling. Duration, obviously, is the length of time that you're on top, and dominance is how much on top you are, basically. So that's kind of what the criteria was for the last while, and it says in the criteria that if you are to give a 10-8, there are a couple of different ways of doing it. So those 3Ds, if you have all 3 of those Ds, right? If you have damage at the end of the round, you have domination at the end of the round, you have duration at the end of the round, that is a 10-8. That was what was written in the criteria. If you have all of those 3 things, it is a 10-8. And, we talked about, for years, the difference between 10-8s in boxing and in mixed martial arts. Everyone knows what a 10-8 in boxing is. If you get a knockdown, it's a 10-8. Whereas in mixed martial arts, we didn't really know that. We were like, well, what is a 10-8? We've no written criteria for it. We've no objective criteria, was the word I was told this week by someone, which is very true. We didn't have that for a long time, but I feel with those 3Ds, with that written in the criteria, that we didn't have just a subjective criterion for a 10-8, we had an objective criterion. Now, parts of that objective criterion are subjective, 100%, but you get me, you get the point. There's a written rule set for what a 10-8 can be. So, right, if you have all 3Ds, that is a 10-8. If you have 2 of those Ds, which are, again, damage, duration, and dominance, it must be considered. So, if the reason they say it should be considered is because it's not always going to be like that. So you could have a round, say, like, and I hate to use the example, let's say a John Fitch round back in the day, or someone like that. It could be anyone who gets on top maybe a minute and a half in and spends 3.5 minutes on top. So they have the dominance and the duration. But when you land almost no shots and you only have that dominance and duration, should that really be a 10-8? Well, that's to be considered under that criteria. I think most judges would say probably not. If you have the 2 of those Ds and you land a bit of damage, you land an elbow and then you cut someone open or something like that, absolutely. But without that cutting elbow, or without a lot of shots, a lot of judges wouldn't give it and would consider it like that. So, but I think because the way the criteria was written over the last few years, those sort of rounds, and even rounds on the feet where someone has the duration and the dominance without much of the damage, some of those rounds were being given as 10-8. So that's what, that was something that was absolutely being done over the last few years. And the rules are, if you have 2 of the Ds, it's to be considered. And then also, if you only have 1 of the Ds, you can be considered as well. So let's say there's, you don't have the dominance, You don't have the duration, but you have the damage. So let's say a round is even up until the 4-minute 30-second mark, and then, you know, it's Junior Dos Santos is fighting Cain Velasquez, right? And Junior knocks Cain down and like hits him with fucking 50 shots. He's almost finished, and the ref comes in and stops it at the 5-minute mark, at the end of the round. That could be considered a 10-8 because he's landed overwhelming damage in that 30-second mark. It's enough, you know, if that accumulated damage had landed in the full 5 minutes, we wouldn't say anything. But he didn't have the duration, didn't have the dominance, but had the damage. So that would be enough to be considered. And, you know, you could consider it with, if you have the duration, someone didn't earn their 9, let's say, didn't fight great over the full 5 minutes, you could give it 10-8. Those were more rare, though. Or, you know, the dominance where someone was just winning the whole round without damage, or without, you know, well, not winning the whole round, but dominating most round. That usually wasn't given as a 10-8, but it could be considered as well. So that's what we had before. Now, how long has this been now? I'm gone on 6 minutes. I've packed that off a lot in there, but basically, in kind of summing it up, we had the 3Ds before: damage, duration, dominance, and those were the criteria for deciding a 10-8. So that was how you decided a 10-8. That was what judges have been doing for the last 5 years or so. That's how they've been deciding 10-8s. At the end of every round, they think, right, was that a 10-8? Was that a 10-9? Let's look at our 3Ds that have this D, this D, this D. Yes, 10-8. Had 2 of them, maybe. Had 1 of them, maybe. Probably not. Had none of them, no, it's a 10-9, you know? So that was the way it goes. That was the way that judging had changed. Now, a few things have changed over the last while, and this is maybe a prelude to what we have now. So, a few things have changed. I actually spoke to Andy Foster from California the other day, and he was really good with his time to me, and he explained a lot of the things with this change to me, and with what 10-8s should look like going forward, or what he thinks maybe the mistakes were with 10-8s. But I think a lot of people kind of behind the scenes in the commissions maybe thought, and Andy didn't say this to me per se, but I think some people were kind of thinking it, that maybe the 10-8s were getting a little bit too generous. You know, maybe there was too many 10-8s, and maybe there was 10-8s being given when the damage didn't exist. So I think there has been a plan, or not a plan necessarily, but a thought from some people in athletic commissions with influence to adjust this for damage to be the most important part of the criteria when deciding 10-8s, which is absolutely fine. You know, there's a rules meeting every year, and from what I'm aware, they're wanting to bring this to the rules meeting next year to get it officially written into the criteria, or get the criteria adjusted in little ways. You know, that's absolutely perfect. That's been happening for years. It happened in 2016, I believe it was 2017. Or sorry, yeah, 2016-17. And, you know, the criteria can be changed. Look at different parts of the rule sets, like the hand down or the finger down part of mixed martial arts. That's been changed over the years. The criteria has constantly been changed. Absolutely no problem with that. So I'll get on later to whether I agree or disagree with that, and we will get to that. So that has kind of been in the thinking, I think, of a few different people with influence, which is no problem. You know, that those are the people who are there to make the rules, to change the rules, to adjust the rules, so there's nothing wrong with that. But I think a bit of pressure has been put to change it more quickly than maybe it should. So normally something like that would happen, or there'd be a thought like that, and we would have to wait until the criteria was rewritten for the rules to change. But the rules have changed now. And as I said, I'll explain what those rule changes are and what is different now in a minute. But it's some commissions, like there was, I think they were kind of spooked a little bit into changing or into adjusting what they are telling their judges to do because of a few fights. You know, Amanda Nunes versus Felicia Spencer happened, and that was a fight where there was a few borderline 10-8s. And, you know, Dana White was roaring and shouting about it after the fight, saying, why is this a 10-8? Why is this? You know, the usual Dana White stuff. And he's like, oh, I don't know if he said this outright, but, you know, his usual sort of thing, oh, maybe you know, fights like this keep happening, we'll move out in Nevada or something like that. But not necessarily that, but maybe something kind of adjunct to that, right? And I think when an athletic commission hears that, they're thinking like, well, you know, we're changing these rules anyway. We want to move these rules anyway. We want it. Let's just do it now, right? And then a fight happened as well. Israel Adesanya against Jan Blachowicz in the final round of that. It was another one where there was complaints about the 10-8s in the final round of that. And it's another one which piled the pressure on, which I think spooked athletic commissions into having this change. So now we have a change, right? And whether that's the case or not, and whether it spooked them into it or not, those sort of fights and those sort of rounds, and it's not just those were kind of the big rounds, or the big fights, but fights in general have sought a change in what we're doing with 10-8s at the moment. So what we're doing with 10-8s now, I will explain. So 10-8s now are being judged in a different way, and this is for sure. All the big judges in America, there's a list of them. You'll probably see them every week in California and Las Vegas and all those different places are judging 10-8s now in a different way. They're no longer judging 10-8s purely by the 3Ds, where if you have all 3Ds, you get a 10-8. It's no longer that way, right? So 10-8s now with I suppose the memo that has been sent out by athletic commissions, I think starting with Nevada, but the other commissions, or some of them at least, are on board with this change, and all the judges are judging this way, and it's spreading as well to overseas in different places. But the judges in America, the top judges, are judging this way, where damage is the only criteria for a 10. And not necessarily the only, but the most important. So if you have the duration and the dominance with no damage, you are not getting a 10-8. It was a possibility before, you know, it was a possibility, but right now, it is no longer that possibility. You need damage now in a mixed martial arts fight, in a mixed martial arts round, to get a 10-8, right? That is the way the judges are judging it. That is the way that all the judges across the board that have been let to know about this are judging it. So it might seem like a minor change, you know, it might seem like something that was kind of happening anyway, but it's not, I don't think. It's not, it's, what it's doing is, right, we had a criteria that was written, and that was written for a reason, you know, that was written with the objective nature in mind, to have a way of defining what a 10-8 is, right? And okay, this is a kind of a new definition for what a 10-8 is. But the problem with this new definition for the 10-8 is it kind of rewinds back to what we had before we had that new definition for a 10-8, where it was just this overwhelming damage stuff, which is very much objective. Now, I don't think it's rolled back all the way. I still think the judges, because they have more experience at giving 10-8s over the last while, kind of know what a 10-8 looks like more than they maybe would have before, because it was a thing that wasn't as prevalent as it once was. But right now, that is becoming, the objective nature of the 3Ds has become more subjective, because now it's 1D that matters most. So it's being, you have to have a lot of damage now to get a 10-8. You know, for years people were kind of saying that for the last 4 or 5 years, you have to have a lot of damage to get to a 10-8, when it wasn't necessarily the case, because we saw lots of 10-8s, and there was 10-8s in fights, and maybe people were shocked by them and things like that. But now that is the case. You know, the Colby Covington, Cameron Usman second round was a great example. There was a good bit of damage in it, right? Usman was probably just about winning the round, and then there was a good bit of damage, but that was a 10-9. And why was it a 10-9? Because there wasn't overwhelming damage, because it wasn't clearly a 10-8. So it's not just that you need damage, it's you need overwhelming damage. And what I've spoken to, I think maybe 3 or 4 judges about this, and every single one of them basically have told me now at this stage, if you're thinking, is that a 10-8 or is it a 10-9? Right now, in 2021, it's a 10-9, right? If that's even a discussion. Look, if it's, do you think it's a 10-8 Or you know, you think it's a 10-8 or a 10-7, it's probably a 10-8. You know, maybe it is a 10-7. Or if you were like, well, that's overwhelming. He beat the absolute brakes off him for 5 minutes. Then it's a 10-8. You know, 10-8s are not banned. You can still give 10-8s. But if it's a borderline 10-8, they're no longer being given. They're being given as 10-9s. And that's the way the judging criteria has changed. So, you know, a borderline 10-8, 10-9 before that had all 3Ds and satisfied all 3Ds would have been given as a 10-8. Whereas now, if it satisfies all the 3Ds but it doesn't have overwhelming damage, it's not given as a 10-8. So it's a big change. And like maybe this is very inside MMA judging, and I suppose here at Sherdog is the place to do it like that, because we're, you know, the hardcore MMA fan base. So there's no better place to do it, I suppose. But that could be a massive change in terms of the end result of a round or a fight. Because 1 point in a round can change, like a 3-round fight. It's usually 30, 27, 29, 28. 1 to 3 points is usually the difference between how fights are won and lost. So the lack of a 10-8 could lead to a lot more draws. You know, it could lead to, or a lot less draws, even if you want to put it that way. It could lead to a lot of different results to what fights would have been a year ago. Like, when the criteria changed in 2016, judging fights back then, let's just say you judge a fight in 2012 and you get 30-27 back then. Now that fight would be judged very differently, and it could be 30-27 the other way because of the revised criteria. The revised criteria really was a revised criteria, and it changed everything we know. And it really did. It changed the way that fights are judged completely. This also does it in a much smaller way, in terms of it's not going to be every fight all the time, but it is going to be a lot of rounds that come up in lots of different cards regularly. So in conclusion, again, and I'll talk about the future then going forward, I think the conclusion, I suppose, is of damage. Overwhelming damage is needed. It needs to be a 10-8. We have to know it's a 10-8 before it's a 10-8. If you think it's borderline, it is a 10-9. And that's the way it is right now in the present. So looking forward to the future, I think what's going to happen with this is it's going to be brought to the ABC next year. I think it's in July, or in the summertime anyway. And I think they will try to get the wording of the criteria revised, not just in the 10-8 part, in some other parts as well, just to make things a little bit more clear and to adjust things. I really think that is going to happen, and it is going to happen. I'm led to believe that's going to happen. But as we have it right now, that adjustment has already happened in terms of what the judges are doing. So right now, the judges are judging that way. And you know, if it passes in July, they'll continue to judge that way, and if it doesn't, well, I'm not sure what's going to happen then. Maybe it'll be the case of we revert back to what we've been working with for the last few years, but we will see on that. But my opinion on it, my take on it, and this is purely my opinion, is that this is a bad change. I don't like this change necessarily. I like an adjustment to the criteria. I like adjustment to the 10-8, but I think the adjustment needed to be really on the 3Ds rather than just the damage part of it. I actually think the damage part of it was fine. I think you need to adjust the duration and dominance part, because if you did that and you took away that, and you took away the necessity for the 3Ds to be part of a 10-8, and instead had it like we have it now, in terms of you need to have damage, but not overwhelming damage. Like, if you have damage along with the other two, I think it should still be a 10-8. But if you have the other two without the damage, I don't think it should be a 10-8. Like, that's the way I think it should be. Now, that was in the criteria anyway, and that was how how judges were judging it anyway. But I think that needs to be something that is written as an objective rule rather than maybe a subjective rule, and how the judges are kind of figuring it out for themselves or agreeing to judge in that way. I think it needs to be written that you have to judge in this way. You have to judge as damage as one of the 3Ds. If you don't have damage, you're not going to get a 10-8. Not, as I said, not overwhelming damage like the way it's been adjusted to now, but just damage in general with a round that someone is winning, or dominance with a little bit of damage can still be a 10-8, you know? Whereas now, dominance with a little bit of damage is a 10-9. I think that really is the way it should be. But I think, you know, going forward, and that's my opinion on it, and I leave it at that maybe, but going forward, it'll be very interesting to see what is going to change, what we're going to be told about, and how it's going to be pointed out. Because I think the big issue here for me is the communication of it. Because I think everyone over the last few weeks has been kind of looking at rounds and saying, why isn't that a 10-8, you know? This was a 10-8 6 months ago, and we are baffled as to why it's no longer a 10-8, you know, and me especially, and people who maybe take an interest in judging. They have really been baffled by it, and the reason is because the judging criteria has changed. So the fact that that hasn't been communicated by the athletic commissions, by the promotions if they know about it, by the even not necessarily the judges because it's not their job, but by everyone in charge, is a big error. And I think a huge problem with judging is the communication of how rounds are judged. Like, a lot of people have said, I put out a video about how rounds are judged, you know, I read the criteria out and it goes, wow, this is something we've never seen before. And I put it out maybe a year ago over on YouTube. But this criteria was revised in 2016. It's there 4 or 5 years, you know? And nobody, nobody got that out there. Very little people were talking, very few people talk about it. You hear, it's mentioned at the start of every podcast by John Anik, quickly forgotten by most of the commentators. You hear John McCarthy talking about it as well in the broadcast, but it's not something that's communicated half well enough for my liking, I think. And I think the commissions really need to adjust that. They really need to have, I don't know how you do it, whether it's getting judges and officials to do interviews on big platforms, whether it is putting out videos and things themselves, putting up online tutorials maybe where everyone can watch it for free and learn how to, a judging course from Sal D'Amato or Mark Goddard or John McCarthy, whoever it might be. I think that's the thing they really need to do going forward, to not only to tell people what we have as the judging criteria in a whole, but also the adjustments that are made to it. Because, look, adjustments to criteria in sports in the middle of a season are not odd. Anyone who follows the Premier League, I'm sure it's the same in the NFL or other ones. They happen all the time. What a penalty is in the Premier League at the start of the year is different to what it is at the end of the year a lot of the time with handballs and everything like that. So this is not odd. This is not like, there's not anything nefarious going on here or anything. It's just an adjustment to something that they thought was not going in the right way, with a little bit of pressure maybe to adjust it as well. But the only thing I think is wrong is the communication of that change. It just hasn't been there. We are, a lot of people, 99% of people outside of the judges and a few people who have talked about it, are completely in the dark here. So that, I leave it at that. Let me know what you think of this video in the comment section, and spread the word, because it's something that affects everyone. Everyone watching fights, everyone covering fights. It really is something that every week we're going to be affected by in terms of the scoring at the end of the fight. Because if you know about this change, you might score a fight, 29-28. If you don't know about it, you might score a 29-27, or 30-27 to 30-26. It's that change. It could be a big change, or it could, move a fight from 28-28 to 29-28. It could change the whole result of a fight based on this little change. That's actually a pretty big change. So I will leave it at that. I'll have more judging podcasts over the next while. Nothing planned at the minute, but if a big fight happens, if something changes or anything like that, I will pop on here and do a judging podcast. If there's anything you'd like me to talk about, any part of the judging criteria or anything like that you would like me to talk about, if you read the criteria and go, I don't understand that part, leave it in the comment section below. Tweet me at Sean Sheehan BA, and I would absolutely be delighted to come on here and do a video to help explain and to help understand. All right, everyone, I'm Sean Sheehan for Sherdog.com, and I'll see you all next time.